All right, YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. So we are going to be taking a look today on this live stream at John 1:18. Yes, we're going to take a closer look at what's going on there. So if you were here for the last live stream, we talked about the ESV and the updates that they are making. There were, I think, 30 some, and most of them were just kind of like ho-hum, but a couple of them were kind of a big deal. One of them was the passage in Genesis that talks about the relationship between men and women, Genesis 3, and then the other one was John 1:18, and they took a very different approach. So most of us may know the verse as something like, no one has ever seen God, but the only begotten Son who is in the bosom of the Father, he has seen God. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into that because, like I said, the ESV did something that I haven't seen before. And in the last live stream, I seemed like I wasn't really aware enough. So apologies ahead of time. I don't know what's going on with my internet connection, but my upload speed seemed to be subpar. So I'm actually, tethered to my cell phone, but nonetheless, hopefully I'm coming in, very well, loud and clear. I think I got all the sound issues sorted out from the last live stream. But anyway, hello to everybody. Get gnomed. How's it going? Friendly neighborhood Jesus freak. It's only begotten Son, full stop. Yes, that is true. Now, I'm still in agreement with that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm not. I'm still with the only begotten Son. I think that's our best English translation of that specific phrase, not just here, but in John 3:16 and John 3:18, 1 John 4:9, Hebrews, was it 11:4? Or 11:17, can't remember, but I got it in my notes here. So I'm also going to try something a little different today. This time, I put together a PowerPoint slide to keep me on track. I've noticed in watching my own live streams over the last little bit, yes, I do watch them just to see, and I've noticed that the quality of content has kind of dipped a little bit. So I'm hoping to bring that back, and we're going to do that here while we discuss John 1:18. We have James Snap Jr. in here, Banff, and here I am. And we also have Joseph Polema has popped in as well. So there we go. The connection is about as good as it usually is. Yeah, we're supposed to be getting fiber this year. So when we get the fiber, my connection will hopefully, right, depending on the provider, because we all know how providers are, should be good to go. All right. So like I said, we're not going to divert much further. But I am going to go to here and show you my little slide. I got a picture. I think that's, I can't remember that. I think that's Sinaiticus in the background there. I was just taking a brief look at it earlier and thought that would make a really good background for the slide. So here we are. So here's the change that was made in the ESV. So in the 2016 edition, this was the last edition before this one, it says, no one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. But then in the ESV 2025 edition, they updated it or changed it. I don't know if it's really an update or a change. They could go back and forth on this because I don't really think that they're entirely settled on this issue. Now, granted, this is, if you look at it from a critical text perspective and a couple other perspectives, this is a rather difficult one. But for us Byzantine priority guys, it's actually quite easy. If we're going to take Occam's razor, right, Byzantine text it is. But anyway, so the 2025 edition says, no one has ever seen God. God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Now, this is interesting because initially when I was looking at this, I saw God, the only Son, and thought to myself, well, that's interesting. It looks like they're conflating the two readings. So for those who aren't aware, this is a very famous textual variant in which there could be one of two readings here. It could be the only begotten God or the only begotten Son. And so initially when I saw this in the ESV 2025, I thought, well, you know what? It looks like they're just kind of including both readings in there, and they're using both readings from the Greek tradition and then kind of like putting it in there so that we have it both, so that works both ways. But that's not what they did. I was totally ignorant on that. I have to admit, yes, I apologize if I misrepresented anybody in my last video, but I was totally ignorant here. But now I understand what's going on, and it's got to do with the word monogenhs, which we translate often as only begotten or only son or unique only son. We're going to take a closer look at that. Now, the ESV was actually Geekenomed. I saw you waiting earlier. I was just too busy getting everything rolling here. I would have said hello earlier. Hey, Jew and Greek, how's it going? So we take a look at the next slide, and the ESV isn't. Hey, there we go. You're seeing my old stuff from my old one of my previous scenes. So this isn't the only translation that has made a shift to something like this. So like you take a look at the New American Standard, the 1995 edition has "No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him." But the NASB 2020 edition, the latest one, made this jump into really the same essential thing that the ESV did. "No one has seen God at any time, God the only Son, who is in the arms of the Father, he has explained him." So there's almost like this kind of idea that the ESV is kind of following in the footsteps of the New American Standard Bible. Now, what I suspect is the men involved in the New American Standard translation and the men involved in the English Standard Version translation probably have very, like if you were to trace their not their theological, but their academic footprint, it probably goes back to the same sort of teaching ideas. And this is why they're kind of moving in that direction. Now, I'd be curious if other Bible translations will move in that direction to taking something like only begotten Son or only begotten God and changing that to something like God the only Son in any upcoming editions. Again, I think this is wrong. I don't think we should be doing this. I'm not one of those guys that thinks every single, translation is necessarily right. I mean, perhaps that could be the case. Sometimes things can be translated differently and it works out, but I think other times it can be translated differently and it doesn't work out. And I think, okay, this is my opinion, okay, no shade at anyone else, because most out there who are doing this kind of work are much smarter than I am. But I think this one misses it. I think what's happening here is they're taking a number of sources and kind of like what you do with a critical text, and you take stuff from here and take stuff from there, and you pull it all together and you come up with this sort of like, Frankenstein thing. I think what God the only Son is a Frankenstein, but in the translation world. And you'll see that as we go. So I wanted to take the specific direction, and I hope you don't see this as entirely dumbed down. I did want to simplify the issue here so that those who don't typically run in these academic circles can kind of understand what's happening. And then at the end, what I'll do is I'll share what I think is the proper way and give you a little bit of my reasoning for that. So the three main issues that we want to look at here is, one, a textual matter. Okay, again, it's a question of only begotten God and only begotten Son. The difference there is God versus Son. Some manuscripts say monogenhs huios, the only begotten Son. Most manuscripts do, actually. And a few older ones say only begotten God. And then there's a translational issue on top of that. So how do we translate monogenhs? That's the second thing we're going to look at. And then we're also going to look at how monogenhs relates to theos. So these two here, step 2 and step 3, point 2 and point 3, that's going to talk specifically about translation and why something is being translated that way. Now, again, I don't think these people are dumb, and I think there are reasons for doing the direction that they did. I just don't think that it's the right way to look at it. And then, of course, the first one is, textually, we're going to obviously take a look at the textual variation here. We're not going to go as deep dive into it like I normally do because there's a lot to cover here. So before we get into it, let's pop over the comments really quickly and see what's going on here. All right. We've got, I'm clicking stuff. Let's see. Let's pop over. There we go. So we've got, your stream glitched and I thought I had to wait another 57 minutes. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. But one of these days, my internet connection will get better. And even this new laptop thing I got, it doesn't seem to be working so well for the live streams. But nonetheless, it's doing the job. So Geekenomed says hello. He's got the power, so don't make Geekenomed mad or he might boot you. All right, ESV seems to have taken something similar like the NIV. It seems more similar to the NASB. But yeah, I think the new NAV did something like that. Either way. So God the only Son. So kept pure in all ages. NASB 95 is the most honest rendering of the Greek text. Yeah, I think so. NASB took the critical text and translated that without adding any funky things, right? The only begotten God. I believe that's what it was. I could pop it up here. Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah, only begotten God. How's it going, by the way, Christian? Hope things are well with you. The ASV had footnotes, God only begotten. Yeah. It's a strange one. Again, it comes down to the grammar. Specifically there. And there's a number of ways to manipulate the grammar to make God work there. And what's really interesting is when you take a look at some of the textual variants, we'll revisit this. But there is a variant in the manuscript tradition. I think it was P74. It puts the word the in front of God. And so what the in front of God does is it totally destroys the possibility for translating it the way that the NASB and the NAV, and the ESV did. How many letters before SV? It totally destroys the way the ESV translated that. So it's not a viable option for that translation. So not that really impacts anything, because as a Byzantine guy, right, only begotten son is the right reading. And of course, when you have son on the end of monogenhs, we don't have to do anything crazy and wacky with it. So, yeah. All right. Who else we got here? Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak says the ASV had a footnote, God only begotten. Yeah, and that's strange, right? I would think that they would put like a comma there. That might work out if they're going to go apposition. However, we'll get to that. Mr. Moreno says the 1989 NRSV and the CEB also say God the only Son. Well, there you go. So someone has put it in there before. The Daily Gripe says, my little Gnomi. He's got the power. Yeah, he's got the power. Oh, yeah, Sailor Moon. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Wesley Grau, how's it going? Der Ingeboren Son. I don't know. That looks German. I can see that by the der. I have no idea what you're saying. And then Mr. Moreno, the 1973 NAV. And the ICB NCV agree. God the only Son. Interesting. All right. Okay, let's pop back over to the PowerPoint and let's see what's going on. All right. So the first thing we're going to look at is the textual issue. And this is it right here, right in front of your face. You're looking at it. The question is on the left side as you're looking on the screen, we have huios, and that's nomina sacra. So the whole word is, the four-letter word is compressed into two, and then a line is overdrawn. And that's typically how we see it in the manuscript tradition. That means son, huios, son. And then the other variant here is theos. Again, that's the four-letter word theos that's compressed and then put a bar over it. That's nomina sacra. It's a way of saving space. I don't know the entire details surrounding nomina sacra, why it was done, whether it was to save space or to show reverence. We see that with a number of words, especially relating to Jesus and God. Yeah, so this is the textual portion. This is reason number one why most textual critics find this difficult, or why most modern translations find this difficult, because there's a textual variant here. So if we pop over to the next slide, we have huios on the top here, and I have a few manuscripts that give us a general idea of what's supporting it. Now, you won't entirely see what's going on here, because I only got so much space on one slide. But you can see the manuscripts we have are Alexandrinus, Codex C. This looks like the third scribal hand, has huios. E, F, G, H, S, W, or U, Washingtonianus, all have huios, all have son, only begotten son. And then when you look at the ancient versions, we have the Old Latin, the Vulgate, the Syriac. This is the Curetonian, the Herclean, and the Palestinian, all have only begotten son. And then we have the Armenian, the Ethiopic, the Georgian, and the Slavic versions, all contain only begotten son. Now, when you look at only begotten God, yes, I'm using the phrase only begotten God, even though it can be translated a whole bunch of different ways. It's just the easiest way to do it for the sake of this conversation. The main witnesses to this are right here, P66, P75, Aleph and B, so Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Codex C, the original, okay? If you go up here, someone came along and corrected it to Son. And then we have Codex L and 33. Now there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's one more. I think 850. I didn't include it in here. There's 8 manuscripts that contain God, only begotten God. P75 is interesting because it doesn't really contain only begotten God. It contains only begotten the God as one of the only or fewer. I think it's the only one that has the article in front of it, and we'll come back to that. But what you don't see here on Huios or Son is that the majority of manuscripts contain it as well. And when I'm talking majority, I'm not just talking about like, this 60%. It's closer to like 99%. Like, it's insane. You take about 1,600 plus manuscripts which have only begotten Son versus 7 or 8 manuscripts that have only begotten God. So even in the versions, there's fewer versions here. The Herclean, which is also listed here in the Syriac, has a marginal reading which has Theos in it. But the Herclean text typically has only begotten Son. There is, I believe, one Coptic Bohairic manuscript that has only begotten God. And that's it. You compare the old Latin tradition and the Vulgate with only begotten Son. Again, the Latin translations go the furthest back. So now I know some will argue that the Syriac translations came first. I don't know how true that is. I don't know what came first, Latin or Syriac. It would be an interesting deep dive into. But our earliest versions also contain only begotten Son. I think for me specifically, when you look at the external evidence, I don't think we need to go to internal evidence. I think the external evidence speaks for itself. That the proper reading ought to be only begotten Son. And this only begotten God or one and only God or God the only Son doesn't work out. But we will take a look at, especially though, God the only Son, because it's strange to me how they got there, but I understand why they got there. All right, so we'll take a quick look at Bruce Metzger, but before we do, let's pop over to the comments. We're going pretty good here. All right. A slip of the pen is also possible. In fact, I use a similar explanation for Hebrews 10:23. Yeah. I mean, it's a single letter. I mean, we go back here. And you see the difference really is a single letter. And so I know an epsilon and a theta, they don't really look the same, but again, you never know what happens with some of the way that manuscripts kind of get damaged or anything like that. Perhaps that's the case. I don't know, but it is really only a single letter. Maybe someone saw the sigma and the line, and maybe they saw a whole bunch of nomina sacra of Theos, and so they just assumed it was Theos because the epsilon was hard to see. Who knows? But yeah, it could very well be a slip of the pen. So where was I here? Let's go back. Scene. So Daniel Buck says, how's it going, Daniel? Glad you could be here. This is not one I've spent a lot of time on. Seems to be a good candidate for Orthodox corruption. I know, as far as I understand, I think this is one of those variants where Bart Ehrman would go the direction of, well, this is an Orthodox corruption, so it was probably Theos and Huios wasn't it. But again, I don't know because I haven't read Ehrman on this specific issue. Though the notes in the NET do interact with Ehrman's thoughts on this, which I think he did go with Theos. But it was a matter of how to translate it. And Ehrman, if I understand, tends to go with the substantive, the adjective rather than the appositional substantive. We'll get there. That's fancy words for those who may not know the issue, right? We'll explain what all that means, and you will hopefully by the end of this have an understanding of what's going on in John 1:18. All right. Son is like 1,500 plus. Yeah, I think it was 1,600 plus. Yeah, it's a lot. But it's more than just Son versus God. There's another textual variant, homogenes versus monogenhs. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to dive too much into having the article before monogenhs, but I am aware that whole monogenhs is a Byzantine reading. Um, yeah, if you don't have the article before that, I mean, I could see how that would require a little extra explanation. Um, yeah, that would be an interesting thing to look at. So slip of the pen. The only begotten Son. There we go. The German edition. Only begotten God seemed to be a reading found primarily in Alexandria, so not much diverse support. Right, exactly. The papyrus manuscripts, Vaticanus Sinaiticus, and what was the other one there? Yeah, Coptic. That's right. Codex C, Codex L. I don't know if L was Alexandrian. I have to look at that. 33 is definitely Alexandrian. But yeah, it does seem like a very specific, in a specific geographic location. However, I know many will say you can't say that, but I think you can. P66 monogenes theos. P75 homogenes theos. Now I thought P75 was homogenes ho theos. All right, Buck Daniel. I do think the moderns are wrong to translate monogenes as only. I don't think the New Testament authors made a meaningful distinction between monogenes and monogenes. Okay, interesting. Well, where did I go here? Mr. Moreno, the Syriac supports it. Yes, it does. Mostly. Dr. Mike Rev Napier. How's it going, Mike? Dr. Mike, I thought the NKJV was the most accurate rendering of the Greek. That's why the Greek Orthodox Church of America uses the NKJV. Yeah, I think the NKJV and the KJV have nailed this one. Basically, anything that's only begotten Son, I think, is great. Is prime. Is like top of the list for this one. Dwayne, what is your response to "you can't count noses"? My response would be like, you can't ignore them either, right? When something has 99% and you're lining up 7 geographically like local manuscripts against everything else, that's a problem. So I mean, I'm not a strict majority guy. I think there's places where you can have a majority, but that majority is so ill-defined that it requires a little bit more digging. But yeah, so if you come to the case with you can't count noses, you can't ignore them either. That's just simply my way of looking at that. Again, especially when most of the stuff that we see in regards to a majority are typically like upper 90s in the percent. Like you would have to have a very, very good reason to ignore that kind of majority. Now, when you start getting to like 60 and 70%, yeah, I would look at that a little bit more, but that's where I'd go with that. Get genomed, but Sinaiticus is Western in the first 8 chapters of John. It may be. Kepir, the NKJV is very accurate. My earlier comment was about the NASB's honesty with their critical text, which says only begotten God. Yeah. Get Gnome says, the Daily Gripe, do you have manuscripts that are completely a single type, though? Alexandrinus is Byzantine in Gospels, yet it excludes the PA. And Kepir in all ages. Will we get to the Valentinian Gnostics? No, we're not going to get to the Valentinian Gnostics. Perhaps something I can add to these slides later. So we'll see. So my understanding, I didn't dive too much into the Valentinian Gnostics. Might be worth doing that. Probably would be worth doing that. Is they use the reading only begotten God because of the way it introduced their heretical view of the Trinity and who God is. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think Valentinius propagated the idea that Jesus is not God. I think that's what he was propagating. Can't remember exactly. There's so many heretics, so many heresies. We're almost there to continue. Get gnome. So the point is, Sinaiticus represents John 1:18 from the Western tradition, not Alexandrian. Then Kay Lancaster, how's it going? Good to see you. Wouldn't the new ESV reading be something like theos, homogenes, in the Greek? No. So We'll get there. But God is being translated, monogenes is being translated as an appositional noun. And that's totally possible within grammar. So when you do that in English, there's a couple ways to do it. Putting God in the front like that, God, the only Son, is a way to bring out that apposition. I don't think there's an issue grammatically with that. Are there even any manuscripts that read that way? No. Okay, MEV has the only Son. Yes, because the MEV is based on the Textus Receptus, which is mostly Byzantine. But yeah, I'm not too big on the only, and I'll share a reason why in a bit. Jew and Greek, so many heretics, so little time. Yes. All right. Okay. So we're going to continue to use my slides because they are guiding me wonderfully. I like this. I know where I'm going, and you guys know where I'm going. Well, maybe not. Okay, so we'll take a brief look at Bruce Metzger again before we move on to some of the other issues. So again, Bruce Metzger's commentary in John 1:18, they give it a rating of B, so it's mostly certain. It's not an A, absolutely certain, but it's mostly certain with B. And he says, with the acquisition of P66 and P75, because they both say monogenes theos, one says homogenes theos. I thought it said monogenes ho theos. Both of which read theos. The external support of this reading has been notably strengthened. So it was in Aleph and B, and now when Metzger comes along, they find the papyrus in Oxyrhynchus, and they're like, oh, look, we have God in there, so therefore it must be true. So a majority of the committee regarded the reading of monogenes huios. Now this is interesting. A majority of the committee. I'd be curious as to how much of a majority in that committee decided. Was it 50%, 51% for, you know what I mean? How close was it? But he goes, which undoubtedly is easier than monogenes theos. So they're admitting that monogenes theos works better. It sounds better. It works. It's easier. But they say it's to be the result of a scribal assimilation to John 3:16 and 18 and 1 John 4:9. Right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So they're saying in these places in verse 18 and 1 John 4:9, which has only begotten Son, that the scribe just thought in his head. He just thought in his head, only begotten Son. And so when he came here, instead of writing only begotten God, he just had a moment. His coffee ran out and he went down and he wrote Son instead of God. Okay, so that's essentially what they're saying. Now I might have filled in the gaps a little bit there. But the anarthrist use of theos, so anarthrist, just fancy word for saying it doesn't have the word the in front of it, appears to be more primitive. There is no reason why the article should have been deleted. And when huios supplanted theos, it would certainly have been added. The shortest reading, homogenes, while attractive because of internal considerations, is too poorly attested for acceptance in the text. Now, he's essentially arguing here that only begotten God is the harder reading. And so what happens, generally speaking, one of the canons of textual criticism is to not always, but is to prefer the harder reading, right? Lectio difficior. Yes, that's the Latin phrase. I said it. Lectio difficior. Prefer the more difficult reading. And so in the mind of a majority of those on the committee for the Nestle-Aland UBS text, they were saying that this is the hardest reading. Now, of course, many people take issue with this canon. It's not just me, some random guy on the internet taking issue with this, right? A number of people have said, well, maybe this isn't the greatest thing. And to give you an example of why, another explanation for why it's the difficult reading is because somebody made a mistake and put something sort of nonsensical, but not really in there. So a difficult reading could simply be the case of a slip of a pen. Again, there's no certainties here, and this is what's going on in Bruce Metzger's commentary. There's no certainty here. What there is here is probability, and so they're banking on, at least the majority of the committee is banking on the probability that it's theos because they think it's the most difficult reading. This is where it gets difficult because how do you objectively measure that? You take, for example, the 7-8. Oh, hi, kitty. We have a cat now, and she likes to jump up on things. Okay, go away. I don't like cats. It's all good. So where was I here? Yeah, so it's totally subjective. I mean, you can use the rules of modern textual criticism, and then when you kind of run out and still don't know what to do, then you pull out, Lectio Difficior. Oh, it's the hardest reading. So yeah, again, not a big fan of what Metzger's doing here. So excuse me. The other thing that is really interesting here is in Metzger's own writing, one of his guys says down here, it is doubtful that the author would have written monogenhs theos, which may be primitive, transcriptional error in the Alexandrian tradition. Why? Because it's in all the Alexandrian manuscripts. It's in manuscripts that are found in that region or have ties to that region. So we know that it's not geographically dispersed. It's centralized into one place. So something happened in that one place. And Christian was talking about Valentinius earlier. Possibly that's what's going on. Can't say for certain. But yeah, sorry. If I haven't told you already, this is my bias going in. All right. I'm a Byzantine guy. I think it's only begotten son. I think this is quite wrong. But anyway, coming back to this, he says, which may be primitive, transcriptional error in the Alexandrian tradition. At least a D decision would be preferable. This is one dude on the committee, AW. Somebody said what his name was before. I forget who it was, because we talked about this before. But there was a guy on the committee who said, like, a B is too generous. You need to put a D on here because it's not as certain as you're making it out to be. So as much as the committee for the Nestle-Aland, I don't know which edition this would have been used for, but as much as a majority it has been, there were dissenters on there who didn't particularly agree. We know there's at least one. I would be curious to see if there's any more. Anyway, let's move on. So the church fathers in this issue, so we're talking textually, only begotten God or only begotten Son. What do we glean from the church fathers? Not much. They're not helpful here. And again, this is why this particular variant, if you're coming from a modern text critical perspective, this is why it's difficult. Because the church fathers aren't any help. And I got this one example from Irenaeus in Book 4, Chapter 20. So in Irenaeus Book 4, Chapter 20, it says, for all things, excuse me, learn through his word that there is one God, the Father, who contains all things and who grants existence to all, as is written in the gospel. No man hath seen God at any time except the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has declared him. Okay, so you're thinking, like, that's great. We have support from Irenaeus. It's only begotten God. That's earlier than P75, P66, earlier than Aleph, earlier than B. Like, this is the earliest representative of only begotten Son. But then you go down to Book 4, Chapter 20, same chapter, just like 5 paragraphs later, he says, but his word, as he himself willed it, and for the benefit of those who beheld, did show the Father's brightness and explained his purposes, as also the Lord said, the only begotten God, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. So in the same chapter, within the same couple of paragraphs, Irenaeus goes, only begotten Son, only begotten God. So he uses both readings there. Excuse me. So what's happening? What's happening here? Depends who you ask. I don't think we really know what's happening here. But you'll see that there's a little footnote here. I just copied and pasted this from a website. I'm not going to go there. But essentially, what the footnote is suggesting is that this reading here, the only begotten God, is to be preferred, and that the only begotten Son in the previous paragraph was changed to match with the Vulgate. Of course, the problem you have there is that's completely and entirely speculation. We don't really know that happened. Because it could just very well be the other way around, that the only begotten Son is the right reading, and then the only begotten God was changed to match the Vulgate. So it's again, I would come to this specific part with the church fathers and say we won't know from the church fathers. You can look at a number of places, that little Greek New Testament I have from Wayne Mitchell, the 4th edition, where he's got the really nice apparatus. He shows a number of church fathers in there, but then he has words that are dashed, like 2 out of 3, 2 out of 5, 7 or 5 out of 7. And what that is saying is that's 5 instances of the Son and 2 instances of God, or 3 instances of God and 4 instances of Son. This is why if you're coming from a modern text critical perspective, why this is such a difficult variant and why this is such a difficult passage, right? We haven't got to the translation bit yet. We're just talking about the textual variant portion of it. Again, just because people have problems with this doesn't mean we can't know what it is. Again, when we rest on the tradition that was passed down to us, when we rest on the preserved words that have come down from manuscript to manuscript, we are looking at only begotten Son. I think the 7 manuscripts, the 8 manuscripts we have with only begotten God tend to just don't overshadow the vast majority that was passed down. So we don't need to despair. We can know. Now, again, I get it. If you're a critical text guy, you're going to disagree with me, and that's fine. All right. So the next one, how do we translate monogenhs? We're going to take a look at that in just a moment. We are going to pop over and take a look at some questions from the gallery. Hope everybody's finding this useful. Again, I'm trying a new thing with this PowerPoint slide, trying to kind of hone in the way I'm doing these discussions. Let me know if you're finding that helpful. If you are, also hit the like button because that helps. All right. Let's see here. All right, MEV, so many heretics, so little time. All right, so Jesus Freak says, the big argument against only is that Isaac is the only begotten son of Abraham, even after Abraham had Ishmael. Yes, we are going to get to that. Tabby Lynn, love the kitty. Well, that's nice. The cat's name is Curly. We've inherited the kitty. The Daily Gripe says, you don't like cats. I have a red one. I'm okay. I'm getting okay with cats. We have a couple barn cats too that are outside. And the one's name is Fluffy. And every once in a while, we had a lot more barn cats, but every once in a while, that's the nature of barn cats. Sometimes they go missing. So we typically don't name them, but Fluffy's been around for a little bit of time. So he's a survivor. All right, Joseph, wasn't there a study that reflected singular variants, which presumably would be erroneous, commonly made the reading more difficult to read and not less, seemingly arguing against the harder reading? There may have been. I'm not aware of it, though. But the one thing I think that would need to be understood with that is my understanding of the harder reading is that it's usually used as a kind of last case scenario when a textual decision is really difficult and they don't know where to go. Like, for example, in this one here, when the church fathers aren't helpful, in the mind of a modern text critic, when all the old ones go one way, even though the majority goes the other way. And then when there's internal considerations and all these kind of things, I think it's kind of the last sort of thing that's looked toward. So yeah, that has to be kept in mind too, because I find sometimes what happens is good meaning people will come up and say, well, you know, the hardest reading is to be preferred. They always do this, and that's it's not pulled out as you know, okay, that's the hardest reading, let's go. No, there's a little bit more analysis. To be fair, would be good to have a modern text critic come on and talk about the harder reading and how they use that, just to understand what they're doing. All right, Mr. Moreno says, I don't see only begotten as a solution to that problem. Abraham begot Ishmael, did he not? Yeah. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. So meanwhile, our side will say, oh, there's Kitty again. No, Kitty, you're going to shut my stream off. Off you go. The majority of early church fathers quoted using son, though, from my minor research. Well, it depends. And we'll get there, but what's interesting is if you take a look at how the church fathers use monogenhs, they oftentimes, excuse me, they oftentimes don't even put a modifier in there. They just say the only begotten, the only begotten. They don't say the only begotten Son. They don't say the only begotten God. Sometimes they'll say the first begotten. That's one that I saw rather frequently. Or sometimes they'll just say the only begotten, because everybody knows by then, right, by the time of Irenaeus, it's become established enough that when you say the only begotten or homogenes, you know who he's talking about. So yeah, there's this, I think there was this kind of linguistic shift that was happening, where only begotten is used in the sense of a unique, a son born with a unique thing about that. That's kind of my own way of kind of saying that. But because Jesus is really the ultimate unique thing born with some unique attribute, right? I think he kind of taken that, and the sort of par excellence usage of homogenes became normal shortly after the time of the New Testament. So yeah, that's going to get into a question of how homogenes or monogenes is translated when we get to the translation portion here, as soon as I'm done with these last couple of comments here. Get James Snap Jr. Is here, so he can tell us how to spell potato while only using one letter. Put 8 O's. Nice. Yeah, his little jokes, his riddles. All right, barn cats are tough cats, especially in the north. Yes, although we leave the garage door, we have like a garage thing. We leave the door open for the cats, so they get a bit of shelter. And it's been pretty nasty this year. Daily Gripe, try the Rocky Riddle next. There you go. More riddles. James Snap Duna, the Wonder Cat, will be a special guest at my first live stream on New Testament textual criticism, a general brainstorming session in March. Great. Make sure you post that, because I'll probably come by if I can. Mr. Moreno, the ever odd ISV saying, uniquely existing. What is that? Uniquely existing? What? In John 1:18 and 3:16. All right. Yeah, that's straight. That is, for God so loved the world that he gave his uniquely existing son. That's weird. That's weird, man. Okay. All right. Let's pop back here. All right. So monogenes. So this is a bit controversial, but this is the way that I typically understood it. And even now, I can't help but see this as being part of it. So monogenes, that's the word that is often translated only begotten or one and only. I think the NAV went that direction, or unique, or only son is even one of them. But it's a compound word, monos being only, right? Only one thing, only. And then genao being begets, like that is to produce a child. And so where you see the second portion, like you see monos all over the place, but the second portion is very specific. So if you go to Matthew chapter 1, when it's listing out the genealogies, you have a begat. So-and-so begot so-and-so, and so-and-so begot so-and-so. And it's that essence of procreation that seems to be part of this phrase, genao. And so it looks like, okay, now I'm just saying it looks like, whether or not this is an error, I don't know, but it looks like both those words have been bunched together to come up with a definition, or to come up with an expression of something that is uniquely born, or uniquely born. I could say that. So the question, though, about this is right here. Is this considered the etymological fallacy? Okay, is it the etymological fallacy? What is the etymological fallacy? Well, that's when you assume a definition of a word based on the two parts. And the really popular example is like if you take the word butterfly, it's not a housefly made out of butter. It's a beautiful creature that floats around and flutters in the sky. That is very distinct from butter and very distinct from fly. And the only thing that relates the two of them together is that a fly flies, and that's it, right? And so if you were to take a butter and a fly and mash them together, it becomes something totally different than what the two parts are. So etymological fallacy says this is exactly what you're doing. You're mashing the two together and taking the two definitions as part of what the word means, when in reality you can't do that, because when they get mashed together, they take on a whole new nuance of meanings. So is this the etymological fallacy? And I would say not necessarily. I think what happens is every time you use a compound word, and I think there's some in the New Testament. One is arsenokitis. That's a in talking about the discussion of sexuality and homosexuality and stuff like that. Arsenokitis is literally men betters. And that generally works in that context. That's not necessarily an etymological fallacy to do that. Why? Because its usage is exactly that, exactly what the two words combined are. So, Kitty, oh, you're getting in the way of everything. Sorry, we're adjusting to the new cat. Yeah, so again, is this the etymological fallacy? Not necessarily. It only is if assumed based on form rather than usage. So we can take a look at the usage of monogenhs in the New Testament, and we can see that these two parts of the word tend to play a role in its meaning. We won't go through too many examples because there's a lot of stuff going on here. But what we'll do is we'll come over, and then these are ways that monogenhs can be translated. And when I say these are ways that monogenhs can be translated, what I mean by that is these are ways that monogenhs has been translated. Now, whether they're right or wrong, we'll leave that up to you. But a couple examples here is one and only in the NIV in John 3:16, for God gave his one and only son. Now, again, I have issue with one and only. We have only son in reference to Luke 7:12 and Luke 8:42, which is the feminine version. So it can't be only son. So what we need to understand is that monogenhs is an adjective, and it can play both masculine and feminine roles. So it can refer to sons and it can refer to daughters. And in Luke 8:42, specifically, monogenhs is referring to a daughter. So Luke 7:12 is referring to a son. And in these passages here, it's not referring to the only begotten son, the thing that makes the individuals in Luke 7 unique or only begotten is that they are literally the only children that these individuals have. So you can see how monogenhs, it's a little bit like, it feels a little bit more. So the reason why it works here is because the unique feature of the children of these people in Luke 7:12 and Luke 8:42, the unique feature is that they are unique children. They don't have any more children. That makes them unique. Of course, the unique feature of Jesus is not that he's the only son. He isn't the only son, right? You go to Galatians 3, Paul calls us all sons of God. So God has more sons than just Jesus. You look at Genesis 6, right? The whole divine counsel passage, the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, calling something else the son of God. So when you say one and only son, it doesn't catch that. But again, another one would be some translate unique son, unique one. I don't think we need to get some examples there. But what's happening here is they're taking monogenhs and they're applying a whole bunch of different ideas here. Now, there is an interesting way that monogenhs has been translated, and it's here. The early church fathers often used monogenhs without a modifier. Okay, so they would only say the only begotten. Right? Remember, it's an adjective. Only begotten is an adjective, and so typically it would be modifying something. In this case, only begotten son. It's modifying son. Or if you're going with the other reading, only begotten God. If you're going with that specific grammatical feature, but in the early church, especially in Irenaeus book 4, I got some examples here, they will often use monogenhs by itself without any modifiers. Why? Because they understood homogenes is Jesus. It's Jesus. Examples from Irenaeus book 4, this is against heresies. There are 5 instances where Irenaeus refers to the only begotten with no modifier and is definitely referring to it as Jesus. There are 3 instances where he references the only begotten Son, and then there's 1 instance of only begotten God. So again, the majority of the time when the early church fathers, I think this is generally true. Now, I checked specifically in Irenaeus book 4, but he used only begotten by itself as a way to reference the Son. It didn't say only begotten of the only begotten Son, the only begotten God, only begotten. So by the time of Irenaeus, the phrase monogenhs had become synonymous with Jesus. It'd be essentially the same, like a title for Jesus almost, par excellence. But my contention here is that we don't typically see this usage in the New Testament. We don't see it at all. We don't see it by itself referring to Jesus in this par excellent way. So it is used in this way later in Koine Greek or early Byzantine Greek. And that's when we start really seeing this whole idea about only begotten being referred to specifically in this way. So let's pop over to the next slide. Now we need to talk about its relationship to theos. Its relationship to theos. Now, we're not doing the relationship to huios, or a relationship to Son, because I don't think we need to. But the relationship to theos, there's 2 ways only begotten can relate to theos, right? Remember, only begotten is an adjective, and an adjective can act as a noun. Or we call it a substantive, okay? It can act as a noun. And a good example of an adjective acting as a noun in English would be like the old Western poster that says the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Good is an adjective, bad is an adjective, ugly is an adjective, right? And when we say the good, the bad, the ugly, we are turning those adjectives into nouns, okay? So Greek can do the same thing. Greek's adjectives are very flexible in this way. And that's what's happening as they try to relate the phrase monogenhs to theos. And this is why we get a bunch of different translations. We never get different translations of only begotten Son, right? Because it's pretty clear, right? Only begotten Son. It's obviously not going to be only begotten Son because because it just is that this kind of issue doesn't exist with only begotten Son. And again, this is why our text critical friends go, this is the harder reading. Only begotten God is the harder reading. Well, because it could be any of these. So we have this simple attributive adjective, and this is just how we use adjectives normally. Only begotten God, okay? That would just be like me saying purple shirt, right? Okay, purple is an adjective, shirt is a noun. Purple is describing what the noun is. In this instance, only begotten is describing what the God is in the phrase. Now, I think this usage is kind of falling out of favor. Again, the NASB 95 had it, but I'm not sure what the exact issue is. But I know there's something here that lends itself to, not entirely, right? You can interpret your way out of it, but lends itself to some form of aberrant theology of the Trinity. So yeah, now that's pretty straightforward. So because monogenhs is an adjective, can also function as a noun. Now, if only begotten is functioning as a noun, this is where it gets really interesting. We have a noun in apposition. So apposition, what is? Oh, skipping things here. Hold on. So what is apposition? Well, a noun in apposition just simply explains the noun that came before it. So if I were to say something like, my friend John told me to go to the store and get some eggs, right? Friend and John would be an appositional relationship because John explains the friend who I'm talking about. So my friend John told me to go to the store and get some eggs. Now, you could take that phrase and make it a little different. My friend whose name is John told me to go. It's still an appositional phrase. It explains the word that comes before it. So in this case, it's looking at the phrase monogenhs theos in apposition, which lends itself either to only begotten, comma, God, right? He is the only begotten God, not only begotten God, right? It's not attributing only begottenness to God. It's explaining who only begotten is. Now, the other way that's done, that's more clear, that this is more clear, I think, if you're trying to get to this appositional phrase, is how the NASB 2020 and the ESV 2025 update did it, which is to take God and throw it to the beginning of the sentence and then put a comma. God, the only Son. If we take only Son out here and put God the begotten, right, or God the only begotten, then that works better. It for the English mind, it works better. You can see the apposition there, no problem. It's good, right? That's how you can do it. But now this is where it gets really interesting. The reason why they put God the only Son is you go back to what we were talking about earlier. It's this whole idea of referencing Jesus as, quote, homogenes with no modifiers at all. Now, again, my contention here is the reason this doesn't work today is because I don't think that during the New Testament period that this par excellence, right, that this top tier domain of his own, I don't think that existed during the time of the New Testament, but came out from the New Testament. And so we tend to see it in the church fathers, that is later Koine, earlier Byzantine Greek. So although the NASB and the ESV with their later update puts God the only Son, translating monogenes as only Son, I don't think this is warranted. Now, this is where I kind of got a little confused, not confused, but this is where I kind of got thrown off a little bit earlier in my last live stream, because when I initially saw that, I was just like, oh, great, they just conflated the two readings, right? You go back to the text critical discussion and you have only begotten God and you have only begotten Son. And my immediate thought that I just kind of ran with, don't ever run with immediate thoughts, check them out first, was that they just mashed the two readings together because that just was better than trying to figure out which one it was. But clearly that's not the case. So their reasoning behind God the only Son is because monogenes has been translated, especially in some of the ancient versions, apparently, has been translated as the only Son, monogenes, without the modifier weos, the only Son. Again, now, I think what's happening is that translation specifically is, where are we going here? Anachronistic. I think that translation would work if the New Testament writers had that par excellence idea in mind. And I don't think they did. It became a title afterwards. That's my contention. So it would be worth diving a little bit deeper into that. Now, the last deal having to do with it being translated as a noun in apposition is what I called punctuation tweaks. Punctuation tweaks. I think we saw Metzger briefly talk about this. But some have suggested changing the punctuation to make this more pronounced, to make the apposition more pronounced, and how they would how they possibly would punctuate it would be something like this, not exactly, but something like this. No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God, the only begotten God, and he who is in the bosom of the Father has declared him. And so what some might suggest is that, well, if you take the punctuation in this way, what you get are three descriptions of the one who has seen God and the one who has declared him. So again, I don't think this particularly works. In fact, I don't think apposition works in this passage. But if you have to have monogenes theos in there, I think my understanding is to avoid the potential leeway made in that heretical idea of the Trinity, is to translate it appositionally as opposed to substantively. And then P77, this might be an error. My understanding was that P77 had the article before theos. And if you have the article before theos, then that makes apposition not even work at all. So that becomes a remote possibility. Oh, look, I duplicated a slide. Now what? So we know what the problem is. We know what the big issue is. How do we know? How do we know what the right reading is? I'll dive in there in just a second. Let's pop over to the comments and see what y'all are saying. The new cat, a critical text supporter? I don't know. It's a cat, so probably. uh, there is, if I recall, a different usage of monogenhs in Luke 9:38, which the Vulgate translates as unicus, unique only. Yeah. And again, I think monogenhs works in the case where if you have an only child, that's the kind of unique feature of that child, is that they're the only one, right? I think it works there. In the case of Jesus, right, he's the only begotten of God. He's the only begotten of God. Now, we are not begotten of God in the same sense. We are sons of God, huios, to theou, but we are not monogenes to theou. Monogenes has some very specific implications to it. And that's going to be part of the now what section. So as it happens, the good, the bad, and the ugly is a translation of an Italian title. Oh, interesting. Though the Italian title is different order. Il buono, il brutto, il cattivo. Yeah, I don't know Italian. that's my Italian. Brett Malin, how's it going? Gods are not begotten to Christianity. Yes, you're right. They are not. But they are begotten in paganism. The critical text gives you Hercules in John 1:18. It could very well be. I'm not closed off to the idea. Joseph, Polema, Dwayne, I found the singular reading in manuscripts. Let me rephrase that. When I say I'm not opposed to the idea of that, I mean I'm not opposed to the idea of only begotten God possibly meaning that. But I think only begotten Son is scripture, and I think I don't really have to worry about that. Yeah. So, Dwayne, I found the singular reading in manuscript study. It was done by Caldwell. Adam Boyd discussed it with you about a year ago. Singular readings often make the text more difficult and not less. Yes. I think, are you referring to the, these are my brothers and fathers and mothers and sisters passage? There's a bunch of people waiting for you out there, you know, your mother and your brother. And he says, what is it? These are my brothers and mothers and fathers, those who do the will of God, or something like that. Is that the one you're talking about, Joseph? I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. I'll probably get down there in the comments. Later Byzantine Greek, even though the Byzantine text doesn't reflect it. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying there, but Greek went through a number of phases from the time of the writing of the New Testament up to modern Greek. So language changes. And so language, the Greek language, right, it classified, ancient Greek, there's a whole bunch of classifications there. Then there's Koine Greek. And then after Koine Greek, around the 3rd or 4th century, it shifted so much that they can but so much is a relative term, right? But it shifted enough to be able to classify it as another kind of Greek. And so that became Byzantine Greek. So the New Testament is not written in Byzantine Greek. It's written in Koine Greek. And so there are some minor differences, some nuances that change between the two. And I think when we take monogenes and make it only Son, I think that's a later thing that we're saying, or that we're seeing. Because monogenes by itself, it's an adjective. It can be feminine or masculine. I don't think it means only son or only daughter. It's speaking to a unique begotten one. Something about a begotten person is unique. There's something about them. I think that became, especially when referring specifically to Jesus, when it becomes a title for Jesus, homogenes, that is clearly something that I think is a bit later. All right. Friendly neighbor Jesus Freak, a singular reading is probably an error. Agreed. Joseph Polema, Brett Malin. The first time I read the NASB 95 in John 1:18, I immediately thought of the JWs. FNJF, correct singular readings are most likely an error. The study was meant to show that I will follow the harder reading has a flaw, since the singular reading often made the text more difficult. Yeah, that actually makes me think of Mark 1:41 in the New International Version. I think we were talking about it in the Discord server. The whole, Jesus being angered. And so really the singular reading there, I mean, there's 3 Latin manuscripts, I think, that have it. but it's singular in the Greek manuscripts, and everywhere else it's Jesus was filled with compassion. So what's going on here? Well, I don't know, but Codex D is an absolutely wild manuscript, and it's got some wild stuff in it, and it is very eccentric. In fact, so much so, Codex D or Codex Bizet, for you Bizet onlyists out there, Mr. Moreno, I think it'd be worthwhile to do a video on it to show some of the craziness in it. So I will do that at some point. Yeah, so another bad example of Lectio difficilis purior is the angry. Yeah, there we go. The angry Jesus. P77. Did your slide mention P77? No. I had P66 and P75 in there. Excuse me. I thought I had P74 in there. Joseph Polema. Yes, they do like that. And it matches JW theology and Gnosticism. Miss Reno, monogenhs is used without a noun in Luke 84:2, John 1:14, and Hebrews 11:17. Yes, but, this is a big but, in every one of those instances, it still has a modifier on it. Like in John 1:14, he's the only begotten from the Father. In Hebrews 11:17, that's the exception. In Luke 8:42, he says, my child, my only begotten. And I think that's appositional. You can go and take a look at that, but it's definitely modified. Yeah. So Hebrews 11:17, and that's the reason why Hebrews 11:17 is the reason why I don't particularly like the only Son, or the one and only, because we'll get there in the now what section. So James 1:18, begot he us, apikeo, Greek experts. What's the difference? Apokeo, James 1:13. I'm not sure offhand. I'd have to take that away and look at it. Excuse me. Get Gnome says, I found out that angry Jesus in Mark 1:41 is supported by Bizet and 3 other old Latin manuscripts. Yeah, I know, it's wild. Adam mentioned John 7. I go not up yet. Yeah, that's a really common one. However, I've been talking to a few people with that, and the form of the verb that's used does not necessarily require the yet in order to make the statement conditional. It's there's some other interesting things going on there, but with that being said, we'll move on. Mr. Moreno. Oh wow, there's a lot here. Monogenhs is used without a noun. We went through there. There it is. Also, 1 John 4:9 in Greek reads more like the son of him, the only begotten. Ton huionov to ton monogenhs. Yeah, that's a word order thing. In English, that sounds weird, but in Greek, probably not. But the interesting thing here, and the reason why we know this is substantival, why we know this is a attributive adjective, is because both huion and both monogenhs have the article attached to it. So these are not in apposition. We would not claim that as apposition. The Daily Gripe. So how do authors that post-date Byzantine Greek use a language? How do authors that post-date Byzantine Greek use a language not available to them? I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at there. Might need to explain that just a little bit more. Oh no. Hey, what happened to my monitor? Oh, there we go. My monitor just shut off real quick. All right, it came back on. So we're good. Get Gnome gives us the face. What's going on here? So Mr. Moreno, even John 3:16 says ton huion, ton monogenhs, which we could translate as 2 titles, the Son, the only begotten. Yeah, again, probably not, because they both have the article in front of them. I would take ton monogenhs as being a attributive adjective. Kay Lancaster, would it still have been better to italicize Son in the new ESV reading? Yes. In fact, I think the NASB did italicize it. And it's better because Son is implied there. Again, if you want to take the position that monogeny means only son, you have a problem there because it's also used of women. So it doesn't, I don't particularly like the idea of only son in there, because son is implied. It's not explicit in the word. Though that creates the issue that wouldn't make sense without it. Excuse me. Which wouldn't be one of the modern versions kept forgotten. Yeah. So ESV doesn't italicize. NASB 20 does. Rodney Jackson. Hey, Rodney, how's it going? Here is how the NLT renders John 1:18. Yeah, I don't bother with the NLT. And I mean by what I mean by I don't bother. I usually don't check them when I'm looking at these translational things because it's so dynamic. But it says here is how the NLT renders John 1:18. No one has ever seen God, but the unique one, who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. Yeah, again, for me, that's way too dynamic. I wouldn't check. Well, how would they predate? Yeah, that's the point. Then in the New Testament, they how would they predate? See, I don't know. You would take a look at all the instances of monogenhs in the New Testament, and then you would see, like, if you look at that, there are no instances where the phrase ho monogenhs exist in the New Testament that are used in this par excellence sense in the New Testament. It's not there. You could argue, well, John 1:14, that's par excellence because it's not, it doesn't have son there, but it's still modified. Because it's ho monogenes pater patros, all right, the only begotten from the Father, or only begotten of the Father. So yeah, it's still modified. So I don't necessarily see that. Yeah. Okay. So FNJF. Oh yeah, I didn't notice that the ESV doesn't italicize at all. Yeah. Oh that. No, it wasn't screensaver because I've been constantly moving my mouse on there. I think just maybe the connection's a little bit finicky and I moved, or maybe the cat. It was definitely the cat. All right, Mr. Moreno, see, this is why you haven't accepted Young's literal translation into your heart, Dwayne. You know what's funny about Young's literal translation? It's been used by some people. I know a friend who knows someone comes to me with questions about how to deal with certain people. And they have really heretical ideas, and they use the Young's literal translation in the funky way he says eternity, I think, to come up with some really weird thing. So anyway, yeah, Young's literal translation, very literal translations like that are interesting, but you can fall into the trap of taking it too far. Yeah. Especially when you're not aware of the nuances of how certain things work and you don't bother researching it and you just take it at face value. You don't want to take it at face value. You want to look at it first, right? You don't want to do this like superficial, super literal. It's like getting an interlinear out and just reading the English in all the weird order and be like, whoa, the order is different here. So that means maybe not, right? All right. Excuse me. All right, so now what? So hopefully by now you have a solid understanding of the issues. Let me pop back up to the wrong button. I'm going to have to get a stream deck and then I can press the buttons and I won't be messing up with things. So before we answer the now what do we do with all this? I want to bring you back to the three main issues that we were looking at today. The first issue was the textual issue. We looked at the textual issue. Then we looked at the translational issue of monogenhs and how monogenhs has been translated in a number of different places, number of different ways, who and why, and then how monogenhs relates to the word theos in this passage in John 1:18. So hopefully you have an understanding of some of the issues surrounding those. So with all of these issues and stuff, and as much as I have been kind of going through and giving you my opinions on these things here and there, I'm just going to straight up give you why I think Only Begotten Son is the best reading and the best translation here based on those 3 points. So the textual variant issue is really simple. For me, it's the Byzantine text, the majority reading, the Byzantine/majority. I'm mashing them together because they're essentially the same here. That it's son. It's monogenes huios. It's not monogenes theos, and it's no derivative of that. It's homogenes huios. So I'm inclined to go with the Byzantine text and let the historical church decide which readings that is based on, how much has been propagated down to us. The second here is that it's not just a majority, okay? It is a super majority here. You know what? I'm going to fix this slide and make this ugly red that I was using because it's an important word. It's the super majority. Most of the time, and this is no different, when we're talking about majority readings in the New Testament, they are generally 95% manuscripts to like 5%, and that's being generous. Because normally they are in the 98 to 99% of manuscripts go with the traditional reading, whereas the modern critical text tends to go with the very few for a number of reasons. And that's the case here. You have a number of locally Egyptian witnesses here that go with God, even though the broader dispersion of the manuscript tradition has Son. And by broader, again, we're talking about 99%, 1,600 plus manuscripts widely dispersed. A number of versions, most ancient versions also have Son. I don't see a reason to go against that. In fact, when you go against that, you end up with a harder reading that's much more difficult to deal with. And as much as we may say that, the harder reading is to be preferred, maybe it's the harder reading because it's the wrong one. And I think this is the case here. Because when you go into Theos, what you end up doing is having this much more ambiguous phrase put into the text, and it makes it literally harder to translate. As we went through trying to decide if the phrase is only begotten God, whether we should take that as attributive adjective or whether we should take that appositionally, or how we should punctuate that verse, like it just becomes much more difficult, much more complicated when homogenes huios is just so much simpler. It's so much simpler. All right. So that's how I deal with the textual variant portion. I just roll with the supermajority, and it's in the Byzantine stream of manuscripts. Second here, so talking about the translation of monogenhs. So only Son doesn't work because of passages like John 3:16 and John 3:18, or 1 John 4:9. Why? Because it's got a phrase attached to it. It's very clearly an attributive adjective in John 3:16 and John 3:18, even 1 John 4:9. We have only begotten Son. And if the word means only Son, it's very strange to have a word say only Son, Son. Like it's now I get it. Some may say, well, it only means only Son when there's nothing modifying it, but that's not entirely true either, because it's not the word that defines whether it means only Son. It's the context which defines how homonogeny or monogenes would be used if there's no modifier. Because as we've seen in an example in Luke 8, it can also mean daughter. It can also refer to a daughter, not also mean daughter. It can also refer to a daughter. Again, I think when we come to homogenes, its meaning is generally something that is singular or unique. We can use the word unique. I wouldn't use that in a translation, but something that is uniquely begotten or uniquely coming from something. And in the case of Jesus, he uniquely came from God, the Father, right? Because nobody else came from the Father in much the way that Jesus did. So yeah, only begotten references both the uniqueness and the begottenness of the referent. And so this is important because of Hebrews 11:17. So in Hebrews 11:17, we have, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Now that's interesting. Why is this interesting? Because Abraham had more than one son. In fact, not only did Abraham have more than one son, Abraham had Ishmael before he had Isaac. So Isaac was not really his one and only son. Isaac was not his one and only son. He had another son. But you see, what happens here is when we use monogenes as only begotten, it works differently here, because in this case, the unique attribute of Isaac was that he was the only son from the union of Sarah and Abraham. Isaac was the only unique child from the union of Abraham and Sarah, and thus inherited the promise of God. So by using the phrase only begotten, we make this connection to this promise that God gave Abraham, and so continues through to the lineage of who Jesus is. It's a very important phrase. I don't think we should really think twice, in my opinion. when it comes to taking away the phrase only begotten, because you can make those connections in English when you start looking up these words and how they connect to each other. So I would favor only begotten over something like only unique son, because again, only unique doesn't give us the implication of something that is begotten. Or something that came from, or like an offspring, because monogenhs refers to some sort of offspring. And again, I would be more inclined to go in that direction. So the other thing, only begotten references both the uniqueness and the begottenness of the reference. Did I copy that over? Hebrews 11. Yes, Abraham did not have a one and only son, but he did have a only begotten son. And only begotten speaks to the uniqueness of the promise given to the only begotten between Abraham and Sarah. And then lastly, by translating this as something like one and only, the one and only son, it causes a contradiction with Galatians 3:26, which is, "For you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus." Now again, the term here used for sons of God is not monogenhs, it's huios. We. We. It's it's plural form of sons, but hui to theou. So yeah, I think by now to be fair, right? If we translate it as one and only son, it's not technically making it a contradiction, because if you take a look under the hood of one and only son, it's monogenhs, and that fixes things. But most people who read the Bible don't know Greek, right? So it makes it an apparent contradiction when we could avoid the apparent contradiction if we just simply use only begotten in our translation. So that's my direction. That's kind of my thinking here. So lastly, the relationship to theos, I don't have to worry about it because we were going with the first with only begotten son. Yeah, I'm not going to bother getting too wrapped up in the complexities of denying how they translate it one, because it really, for me, it's just not the right reading. We're not translating only begotten God, where we actually should be translating only begotten son, homogenes huios. I didn't feel like it was necessarily to take the time to try to decide whether the apposition is better than the attributive. I mean, just by looking at it and a general feel, it seems to me like the appositional reading feels kind of weird. But I'd have to do a little bit of diving into that, because I don't know if it's weird because I speak English or if it's weird because it's just weird Greek. I don't know if that would be the case. It seems weird because then you would have three appositional phrases together like that. But again, I don't know. It would be something to dig into. All right. Excuse me. All right. So let's take a look at a couple comments, and then we will finish up for the evening. Where are we here? CSB is my favorite translation by far. NLT onlyism. NLT onlyism. B's 18 priority. That's funny. That is funny. The Daily Gripe laughs, because it is funny. It's funny. Mr. Moreno says, Merriam-Webster, the one and only noun used before the name of a famous person to say that there is no one else like that person. Yeah, so here's the thing about that, though. When you use the one and only like that, what you're doing is you're using that phrase in the par excellence term, and the par excellence term is not used. The monogenhs is not used in that par excellence way in the New Testament. So, take that. It's misleading, especially when you refer to like regular people, like the example in Luke 8 and Luke 9. So, doesn't work. Nice try, Mr. Moreno. Try again. Okay. And one last dealio. Let me just pop in really quick here. I have... Oh, where is it? Now I got to pull it up here. Give me a second here. Church fathers will minimize you. You're good. Oh, there we go. Now if I go, where's my comments? I should have had this ready. Content. Well, I'm going here. Why don't you go ahead and in the comments, let me know what you thought of this kind of format that I've been working with, having the slides there and presenting things like that. Did you find that helpful? Was it a little easier to follow along with what I was doing? Should I do my other live streams in this same way? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to your thoughts. And also, if you liked the video, if you found this helpful, do hit the like button, because what it does is it sends the video out into the YouTube nether regions, and it lets everybody see that this is a good video and worth watching. So please do that. It helps the channel out very much. And then lastly here, I'm almost there. Live. I'm going to pull up my own live stream. Alternative trend. The Dwayne is wrong about this word meaning sun. Oh, did I hit the wrong button? No, I didn't. Okay. All right. And here we go. All right. And just to let y'all know, if you'd like to support the channel, I'm making a bid. Actually, I have my friend, Stephen Hackett, works for Daryl Burling at Biblical Mastery Academy. And so we're just kind of working together here. This is an affiliate link. So if you want to learn Greek, there's a 3-week basic course that gets you into the main understanding. I get a little bit of kickback. So if you want to learn a bit of Greek and jump in, this is the place to do it. Daryl Burling's a great guy. Stephen Hackett is awesome, and he's one of the teachers in there. And so you can pop into the link that I provide in the description and jump in there. And if that's something you want to do, that's awesome. You'll learn some Greek. I get a tiny little kickback for it. Helps the channel out. And that's it. So that's what we're doing. That's it for today. You can see some of my files back there. I'm not being interrupted by my kitty cat anymore. And I'll need to work on some of those segues. So let's finalize with some of these comments, and then we'll kick off for the evening. So in the 90s Eurodance song, Mr. Vane has the titular Mr. Vane called himself the only begotten son that breaks the mold. Alternative translate. Yeah, the Dwayne is wrong about this word's meaning son. Okay. The sides probably help you. LOL. All right. Pilgrim 1985 says this was great. Thanks so much for this. Thanks, Pilgrim. All right. Anyway, brothers and sisters, I hope you found this useful. Again, I was totally ignorant of what was going on here in the last live stream. So I went and learned a little bit and corrected that, did a bit better research. And I'm hoping that my videos going forward will be a little bit more focused on something as opposed to being a little more wild. And anyway, I hope this brought a bunch of understanding to you, that now you can look at John 1:18 and say, well, I know what's going on here. And then that will give you a couple tools to equip you to be able to see what's happening. Anyway, brothers and sisters, thanks for joining me on this live stream. And until next time, we'll see you around.